My dad's 60th birthday party was less a celebration and more a meticulously crafted stage for my family's favorite performance. The smiles were professionally white, and my siblings were in their element. There was my sister, Chloe, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer busy live-streaming her curated reality to her followers. And of course my brother Mark, the family's resident fintech visionary, who was pitching the same app that had been pre-launched for 3 years. They moved through the crowd like twin suns, soaking up the light, while I was just a distant planet, silent and barely in frame. The main event was the toast from my mother, Linda, a woman who believed a child's value was directly proportional to their bragging rights. She raised her champagne flute, her face a mask of maternal pride as she waxed poetic about Mark's genius and Chloe's savvy brand synergy, calling them real careers for the modern world. Then her gaze landed on me, and her smile softened into something I knew all too well: pity. "And we can't forget our Sarah," she announced, her voice just a little too loud. "So dedicated to her government work. We're so proud of you for having such a stable little job, honey." The real humiliation landed moments later. My dad's business partner asked what I did, and before I could give my standard vague answer, my mother swept in with a flourish. "Oh, she's just a paper pusher for the Department of Defense," she said, her voice a syrupy mix of apology and dismissal. Bless her heart, someone has to keep the files organized. I saw Chloe across the room, snickering as she whispered to her phone's camera, "Guys, meet my sister." The human filing cabinet. A hot wave of shame washed over me, so sharp it almost made me flinch. But on the outside, I did what I always did. I held my glass, kept my spine straight, and gave a small, unreadable smile. They saw a quiet daughter, content in her small corner of the world, a ghost they had created themselves. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. It was just the loudest echo of a story they had been telling about me my whole life. To really understand the scene at that party, you have to understand the cast of characters. My brother Mark was the family's charismatic but reckless golden child, a man who had been disrupting the tech space since college without ever producing a single finished product. He wore his ambition like an expensive suit, and my parents were always happy to pay for the tailoring. Then there was my sister, Chloe, the family's princess, whose entire career was built on curating a perfect-looking life online, a life funded entirely by my father's credit card. They were a matched set, defined by loud promises and little follow-through. And the ones holding the stage lights? My parents. My mother, Linda, was a woman who mistook her children's financial dependence for love, and my quiet independence for coldness. Her pride was a fragile thing, built on the foundation of her children's perceived successes. And my father, David, was the great enabler, a man who would rather write a check than have a difficult conversation. He just wanted peace, and in our family, peace was expensive. Their narrative was simple. Mark and Chloe were dreamers, investments in a dazzling future. I was reliable, the safe bet, the one they never had to worry about, and so they simply didn't. I remember the day they decided to co-sign the lease on a ludicrously expensive content house in the city for Chloe and her influencer friends. We had a family dinner where Chloe presented a slideshow full of buzzwords like synergy and engagement metrics. She talked about brand deals and a potential reality show. My parents were mesmerized. "You have to spend money to make money," my dad said with a proud clap on her shoulder. "She's building an empire." I watched them sign the paperwork, my mind tallying an internal ledger. The flight school I wanted to attend that was too expensive, the student loans. I was paying off myself. The years of hearing money is tight, all of it vanishing in the face of Chloe's Instagram-filtered dreams. It was the same story with Mark. His first startup, a social media platform for dog owners, burned through $50,000 of their retirement savings before it collapsed. I was there when he pitched them his next idea, something about blockchain and coffee shops. He spoke with such passion, such unearned confidence, and I saw them melt all over again. They gave him another $75,000. "He's just so brilliant," my mom would say to her friends on the phone. "He just needs a little more runway to take off." They weren't investing in a business. They were investing in the story of their son, the genius. They were funding the fiction. My own big moments were different. I'll never forget my graduation from the Naval Academy. The air was electric with pride. The parade ground a sea of crisp white uniforms. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, a culmination of years of relentless work and sacrifice. And for the first 45 minutes of the ceremony, the 2 seats beside me were empty. They were an hour late. They rushed in, flustered and full of apologies. Chloe was having a full-blown sponsorship crisis over a brunch photo that didn't get enough likes, and they had to manage the fallout. A social media snag was more of an emergency than their daughter's commission as an officer. Later, when my mother saw me in my dress uniform, she just sighed. "It's a shame," she said, picking at a piece of lint on my shoulder. "They make you hide your figure like that. The achievement, the rank, the years of work. None of it mattered. She just saw a daughter in an unflattering outfit." That's how the paper pusher lie began. It wasn't really a lie, not at first. After graduation, my career in naval intelligence was, by its very nature, classified. I couldn't discuss missions, deployments, or the real weight of my responsibilities. So when they asked, I gave them the bland, unclassified, and approved cover. "I'm an analyst for the Department of Defense." I thought it was enough. But they heard analyst and pictured a clerk. They heard Department of Defense and imagined a dreary, fluorescent-lit office in a basement somewhere. Their imaginations, so vibrant for my siblings' potential, could only color me in shades of gray. It was easier to let them. It was easier than navigating the minefield of what I could and couldn't say, easier than fighting their preconceived notions, and frankly, safer for my security clearance. They filled in the blanks with their own condescending assumptions, because the alternative, that I, the quiet one, had a life more complex and significant than they could imagine, didn't fit their narrative. My quiet competence wasn't seen as strength. It was interpreted as a lack of ambition. It made their loud, flashy, and failing children seem like the real stars. It kept the family story simple. Lying in bed after that party, I realized they would never see me, because they'd already written my character in their play. So I decided to stop fighting for a rewrite. It was time to burn the whole script. After that party, something inside me shifted. The hurt, that familiar dull ache of being invisible, didn't curdle into rage. It crystallized into something cold, hard, and clear, a diamond of pure resolve. I realized I had spent years trying to get them to love a version of me that I wasn't. My goal was no longer to win their love, or even their respect. It was simply to seek justice for the person I actually was. So I didn't send angry texts or make tearful phone calls demanding an apology. I just went quiet. I stopped playing my part, and in my silence, I started setting a new stage. The first move was simple. The annual family trip to the lake house was a month away, an event I dreaded every year. It was the pinnacle of their performative family bliss, and I always had a ready-made excuse not to go. A deadline at my boring job, a project that needed filing. This time, I opened the family group chat, saw my mother's message asking for a final head count, and typed a reply, "Looking forward to it. I'll be there." The response was immediate. Surprise from my siblings, and a gushing text from my mom about how wonderful it would be to have everyone together. They saw it as a concession. A sign that I was finally coming around. They had no idea it was a declaration. My plan didn't involve gathering receipts in the traditional sense. There were no bank statements or screenshots. My evidence was my entire life, the one I had so carefully shielded from their condescending gaze. I knew that the same weekend as the lake trip was the culmination of Operation Sovereign Shield, a massive, multinational maritime security exercise I had been orchestrating for nearly a year. It was a delicate operation with dozens of moving parts, and there was a very high probability that a critical command decision would be required on short notice. It was a volatile situation, one I would normally insulate my personal life from completely. But this time was different. In the operational readiness brief, when it came time to designate the primary recall contact, I usually put my deputy, Commander Evans, as the first point of call. He was more than capable, and it was standard procedure to protect an officer's designated leave. This time, however, I typed my own name into the slot, Sykes. Alpha 1. All critical, no-fail communications would be routed directly to my encrypted satellite phone. I wasn't manufacturing a crisis or forcing a confrontation. I was simply removing the firewall I had so painstakingly maintained between my two worlds. I was going to let the truth happen. I packed my bag for the lake house, just the essentials. Swimsuit, a book, and the encrypted sat phone I never went anywhere without. They were expecting the paper pusher. They were about to meet the Admiral. The lake house deck was my family's natural habitat, a perfect stage for their Sunday morning performance. The air smelled of fresh coffee and pine needles, Chloe was trying to direct a reluctant Mark in a candid video for her vlog, instructing him on how to look thoughtful while staring at the water. My mother, Linda, was beaming from a lounge chair, radiating the smug satisfaction of a queen surveying her perfect kingdom. I sat off to the side, quietly reading a book, a silent observer to their loud, fragile world. My presence was tolerated, a piece of background scenery they had long since stopped noticing. They couldn't resist one last performance. Mark, after botching a line for Chloe's video, sauntered over to me. "Hey Sarah, you checking your work email?" He joked, gesturing at my book. "Don't want a major paper jam to bring down national security, do we?" My father chuckled from the doorway. My mother smiled gently, adding, "Be nice, Mark. It's good for Sarah to relax. You must miss your little office, dear." I felt the familiar weight of their perception, the comfortable box they kept me in. But this time, it wasn't heavy. I just smiled, a calm, genuine smile, and thought to myself, this is the last time. That's when it began. A low, rhythmic thumping in the distance, a sound that didn't belong in the quiet morning air. A whump, whump, whump that grew steadily louder, deeper, until it was a physical presence pressing in on us. Mark squinted at the horizon. "What is that? Is that a helicopter?" It wasn't just any helicopter. A sleek, dark HH-60 Pave Hawk, the kind you see in movies right before everything goes wrong, crested the tree line. It flew low and fast over the lake, its shadow passing over us like a storm cloud, before it banked hard and began its descent toward the large flat lawn next to our house. Confusion on the deck curdled into annoyance. "Who the hell is that?" My dad yelled over the growing roar. Chloe was frantic, trying to shield her camera as the powerful rotor wash blasted the deck. Napkins and magazines were whipped into the air, a half-full glass of orange juice toppled over, and her precious tripod clattered to the ground. My mother was shrieking something about her hydrangeas being ruined. They thought it was some obnoxious tech billionaire, some rival to their own perceived status, showing off with a loud, ostentatious toy. They were angry at the interruption of their perfect morning. The helicopter settled on the lawn with a final, ground-shaking thud. The side door slid open, and 2 airmen in full flight gear jumped out, their movements crisp and economical. They moved with a purpose that had nothing to do with a casual weekend visit. They headed directly for the deck. At that exact moment, my satellite phone, sitting innocuously on the table beside my book, emitted a single, sharp, piercing beep that cut through the noise. I picked it up. "Sykes," I said into the receiver. I listened for a beat, my eyes on the approaching soldiers. "Copy all. I'm en route." I stood up just as the lead airman, a master sergeant with authority etched into his face, reached the bottom step of the deck. He saw me, and his posture immediately changed. He snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight, and delivered a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. His voice was clear and carried over the whining engines. "Admiral Sykes, the transport is hot. Command control is on standby for your orders." The world stopped. The rotor wash was the only thing moving, the only thing making a sound. My family was frozen, a tableau of disbelief. Chloe's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the wooden planks. Mark's jaw was literally hanging open, his face slack with a foolish, empty expression. And my mother, her face just crumbled. The pride, the pity, the smug certainty, it all dissolved at once, replaced by a vast, shattering bewilderment as the entire narrative of her life, the story she told herself about her children, was incinerated in a single sentence. I gave the master sergeant a calm nod. "Thank you. Give me 60 seconds. I turned back to my speechless family, my gaze moving over each of their stunned faces. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, a silence more profound than any I had ever experienced in their presence. Then I leaned in just slightly, and my voice was quiet, but carried with a new weight. "I have to go to work," I said. "Seems my paper pushing has a deadline." I walked past them, down the steps and toward the helicopter, not looking back. The sound of the rotors was the only thing I could hear, and for the first time in their presence, it felt like my kind of quiet. As the helicopter gained altitude, the lake house shrank below until it was just another property on a postcard-perfect shoreline. Inside the cabin of the Pavehawk, the chaos of my family was replaced by the calm, focused hum of professionalism. My team was patched in through my headset, their voices a stream of clear, concise data about a developing situation in the South China Sea. I was back in my world, a world of complex problems and serious consequences, and I felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home. For the next several hours, there was no room for anything else, only the mission. When we finally landed back at Andrews Air Force Base, the sun was setting. I felt the familiar, bone-deep exhaustion of a crisis managed, a satisfaction that came from competence, not praise. It was only then that I pulled out my personal phone. The screen was a nightmare of notifications, dozens of missed calls from my mother, father, and Mark. A string of increasingly hysterical text messages filled the screen. There were accusations, demands, questions, threats, a digital tantrum of epic proportions. I didn't read most of them. I didn't need to. I knew the words by heart already. I stood there on the tarmac for a moment, the air cool on my face. Then, I opened a new group message to the 4 of them. My fingers moved steadily across the screen as I typed. My life is not a secret, it was just private. You were never interested in the truth, only in the story you wrote for me. The story is over. I wish you peace. I hit send without a moment's hesitation. Then, methodically, I opened each of their contacts. Mother, father, Mark, Chloe. And one by one, I pressed block. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of liberation, as quiet and final as closing a heavy door on a room you never intended to enter again. 1 year later, the air in the Annapolis chapel was thick with history and hope. I stood on the dais, the weight of my dress uniform familiar and comforting. Before me stood a young woman, Ensign Miller, her face glowing with a brilliant mixture of pride and terror. I had mentored her for the last 2 years, guiding her through the impossible pressures of the academy. As I pinned her new rank insignia onto her collar, my fingers steady, I saw my real legacy. It wasn't in a name or a bloodline. It was here, in the quiet transfer of knowledge, in the strength I could help foster in others, in the chain of service that would continue long after I was gone. My life found a new rhythm, one defined by my own values. My apartment, which I'd finally taken the time to decorate, was my sanctuary. The walls were lined with books and nautical charts from around the world. A well-worn leather armchair sat in the corner, a perfect spot for reading, with a view of the city skyline. The silence in my home wasn't empty. It was full. It was the silence of peace, the silence of not having to perform, of not bracing for the next casual dismissal. It was a quiet I had earned, a quiet that belonged wholly to me. I heard about my family occasionally, through a cousin I still kept in touch with. Apparently, after the initial shock, my mother attempted a truly breathtaking pivot. She started name-dropping my daughter, the Admiral, at her charity luncheons and book club meetings. It backfired spectacularly. My aunts and uncles, who had listened to her dismiss me for 20 years, began asking pointed questions. Really, Linda? You always said she was just a clerk. The public contradiction was a source of deep humiliation for her. Without me as the reliable, boring backdrop, the golden children's shine began to tarnish. Mark's startup denied another infusion of cash from a now cautious father, finally and completely collapsed. Chloe's brand of aspirational authenticity began to ring hollow. Her followers dwindled. It turned out their stories weren't very interesting without their favorite side character. I don't feel victorious or vengeful. I just feel light. For years, I thought the heaviest weight I carried was the burden of my command, the responsibilities on my shoulders. But I was wrong. The heaviest weight was their disappointment, their judgment, the constant draining effort of trying to exist in a space that was too small for me. Shedding that weight was the only way I could truly stand at my full height. It turns out the silence they assigned to me wasn't a weakness. It was a space where I could build a life they couldn't even begin to imagine. I learned that some people will only ever see you as the box they want to put you in. So I built a world so big it didn't need their box. If you've ever had to become your own hero, leave a comment below. I see you.